Hello, I'm George Cairns, and in this video lesson we're going to take a close look at the horizontal type tool. And you can find that and its close cousins in this compartment here. And I'm going to show you ways to modify the type tool to produce a variety of creative effects, like popping images into text like we have here, adding layer styles to create a 3D edge to the text, and we're even going to change the very shape of the letters themselves by modifying paths to create creative text like this, which is looking like it's been made out of jam, by modifying it with layer styles as well to add shine and specular highlights and even texture to our text. But I'm going to kick off by just giving you an overview of the type tool and show you ways to modify it. But let's kick off with the basics by selecting the horizontal type tool. That's the most common one because you're going to type left to right, and then click to place the cursor anywhere on the screen, and then just type some text. I've got the caps lock on so that I've got bold text there. It's very small, so like any word processing package, as you move on to it, double click to select a letter or click and drag to select the words. You can then pop up to the font size up here and choose a larger font like 72. You can then drag anywhere outside the text to reposition it like so. So our text is on a new layer. We can turn that on and off at any time, and to select the text just double click on the layer thumbnail, and then you can edit it by using the font family drop down, and you can choose a different font from here depending on the needs of your design. Something like Arial Black will give you a nice strong font. You can also change some of these fonts to bold or italics depending on the type of font you've got, and you can have a sharper or smoother edge, again depending on the design requirements. You can then click to place the cursor anywhere on the text, hit return to add a new line, and then you could always double click here to select all and then change the color as well. Or you can even change the way things are aligned by using these options here. So we click to align things to the left, align them to the right, or align them centrally. Let's go and change the color as well by clicking here to set the text color, and we can choose a nice strong color like this green. Click OK, and then just click to deselect, and you can see the new color and the new alignment. To reselect the text, just double click here, and then what we can do is pop up to this option here. This is called the warp text field, and you can just click here and creatively warp the text in a variety of different ways. And the cool thing about text is it's vector based, so you can change the size and you can warp it and change the way that it's distorted in a creative way without actually spoiling any of it, because it's still a vector shape. It's mathematically created, so you've got lots of smooth edges there. You're not going to get fuzzy edges by enlarging it and distorting it. It's still going to be text, and the cool thing is once you've warped it, you can still edit the text, change the typing, and fine-tune it as you would a word processor. Now the cool thing is, because the text is made up of vector-based shapes, we can modify these shapes to change the shape of the text. And to do that, let's go to Layer, let's go down to Type, and let's choose Convert to Shape, and you'll see a little path appear here, and you can also see a sharp path around the edge of the text like so. And all we need to do to edit that is to click here to grab the Direct Selection tool, and just click on a particular letter there, and you can see the anchor points that create the path. Let me just Control plus to zoom in a bit for a closer look. And the cool thing with anchor points is you can move them to change their position, and that changes the shape of your text. And you also have Bezier curve handles that allow you to curve the lines between each point, and then that gives you more creative ways to fine-tune your text shapes. Typing left to right or up and down, if you use this one here, is all very well, but you might want to actually make the text curve to follow the shape of a design in your image, like the curved chassis of a car, for example. And to get text to follow a path, click here to get the pen tool, and then click and drag to draw the shape of your path, depending on the object you want it to curve around. Then grab the text tool, choose a fairly small font to start with, and as you move the cursor over, you'll see it changes, and you can then start typing. And you may find that some of the letters disappear, so what you need to do is grab this tool here, which is the Path Selection tool. You'll see these little icons here. If you click and drag, you can then extend out the path shape like so. And you can even move it below or above, drag it uphill, drag it downhill, and then go back with the text tool and carry on typing as if you would on a flat line. So typing uphill, I'm going to just double click to select that, and then I can increase the font size accordingly and fine-tune things again using this option here, just to slide up or slide down depending on the needs of my design. Okay, those were some of the basics of the type tool. Let's get more creative now by popping images into the text to produce a design like this. So kick off by opening chicagobefore.jpg. So let's kick off by creating some text. Grab the horizontal type tool. Let's choose impact, which is a nice bold text. Set it around about 207 and just click to type in the name of your city. So I'm going to type in Chicago. Click anywhere outside the text there to get the move tool and then just move it into position like so. If this is in the way, we can move that up and get it out of the way a little bit, and we can increase the end of the letter and the beginning by just dragging this up to around about 215. I'll go to the C as well and type in 215 as well for consistency, just to get a bit of balance to our text. Again, we can fine-tune the position just by clicking underneath and moving around to get the balance right, and we can move it up as well a little bit or down so it's overlapping our buildings, and then just click up here to deselect. Before we move on, here's a quick tip. If you're editing the text, let's just grab the text tool and click to place the cursor in there. You can see we've got this line underneath, and that kind of can get in the way of our design because it's kind of distracting us from the text and the background. So you can press Ctrl H to temporarily hide that line so you can then focus on how the text is blending in with the other details in the image. Once you've created and positioned your text, you're ready to add the background image inside the text itself. So to do that, we're going to duplicate this background layer by dragging it to the Create New Layer icon. There's our copy, and then pop the copy on top of the text layer in the layer stack, and at the moment it's hiding the text on the layer below. What we're going to do now is clip that to the text layer by going to a layer and choosing this Create Clipping Mask option, and that will then place this image layer inside the text. Now at this stage the image is identical to the image in the background, so you can't actually see the text even though this image is actually inside the letters. So what we can do is Control minus a couple of times to zoom out, Control T to get the free transform tool, and then if we hold shift and drag we can extend the size of the image, and that then makes it more visible inside the text. In fact, if we type in 150% in the height and in the width, that will give us a nice large interior text design, so you can actually then overlap the buildings in a similar way just to kind of make them stand out more effectively. When you're happy with that, you can hit return to then transform that particular top layer, and we can now read the text more easily. It's still not perfect, but Control plus to zoom in and you can kind of get the idea. You can fine tune that at any time by grabbing the move tool and sliding around inside the text like so. Now to make our text more legible, we need to add a layer style to it. So click to target the text layer, pop down to the layer style option here and click to choose drop shadow, and up pops the drop shadow layer style window. Now this is the secret to making the text stand out, and you can already see the drop shadow appearing and just defining the edge of the fonts. But what we can do is increase values like the distance and set this to around about 16 pixels or so. So just type in a value and you can see a stronger effect there. You can change the angle of the lighting if need be, but this is fine at 30 degrees, and if we change the spread to something wider as well, like 28, then you can see that we get more of a softened spread around the edge there. You could reduce the opacity to make it more subtle, but this is a very busy image, so the letters need a lot of help to stand out, so leave that at 75%, and that should do the trick. Click OK to apply the text changes there, and now we can read our Chicago text much more easily. To make the text even more easy to read, what we're going to do is just add a gradient to a layer behind the text itself. So click here to create a new layer, like so, and then make sure it's actually behind by just dragging it below, so it's resting above the very bottom layer. And then we're going to use the gradient tool. So if you click here to select that, pop up to the gradient editor and choose foreground to transparent. You can then swap the foreground to a nice white and then choose this option here, which is the radial gradient, and then you're ready to click on the background and click and draw to just create a nice gradient, which will then be white in the center and fading out to transparency, and that just helps the letters stand out much more effectively. So we're going to finish off with a creative project in which we're going to take an ordinary font and then we're going to change its shape to make it look like it's made of jam and it's starting to spread out across the screen. We're also going to modify the text using the very handy character palette, and we can change the leading to see the way the two letters blend together over separate lines, and that makes them merge together more effectively, and that's a cool tool to discover as well. So we're going to be using that later on. We're also going to use layer styles just to create a shiny specular highlight in our jammy surface there. there to make it look like it's made up of sticky jam rather than just flat text. And we'll add layer styles as well to create depth to the jam and give it a 3D appearance. But let's kick off from scratch by just creating our text using a standard font. So pop up to grab the horizontal type tool and change the font to Hobo Standard. You can do that up here, or you can do that in the character palette as well. And let's set the color to a nice jammy red by clicking on color, clicking in the red, clicking OK, and we can then start to type something that we want to say in jam. So if I type eat, hit return and type me, exclamation mark, I can click and drag just outside of there and pop that in position as shown. When we hit return while typing our text, we created an extra line, and the space between the two lines is automatic, and that is called the leading. But we can change the leading by double clicking to select the text first of all, there you go, and then going to the character palette, and it's this one here. We can change the value either by using a point size or just by clicking and dragging to the left or to the right, and that changes the leading between the two lines. And then we can make the jammy text overlap more effectively by creating a leading of around about 155 points, and there you have a more creative effect. Click here to deselect it. You can also use the character palette to select letters and then vertically scale them, or change the way they spread horizontally across the screen depending on what field you use, and you can change color and font as well. But let's get on with something more creative. Let's click on the Eat Me layer and let's go to layer, go down to type, and we're going to make this text look a little bit more jammy by converting it to a shape and then editing that shape. So we've used a fairly organic looking font to start with, but we can modify that with the direct selection tool by clicking on one of the paths, and then you've got access to these Bezier curve handles or the anchor points, and you can then curve the jam to make it look as if it's flowing more organically, especially if you pull down at the bottom here to choose these little sections like so and push these bits up. You can get more jammy shaped curves, especially at this little blob here. If I click here and drag that, we get a nice organic shape. It would be nice to mix that with the top one, so I'm just going to move up and overlap the anchor point like so. So I can carry on tweaking different shapes in turn just to soften them and make them look a little bit more like they're made out of something viscous and organic. We're doing jam here, but you could try doing blood as well. If you're doing a Halloween poster, there's lots of different creative things you can do with these creative curves. And because you're modifying vector shapes, you're not distorting the paths in any way. You're creating nice smooth edged fonts, and there's no breakdown in quality because it's all done with mathematics. So that's the cool thing about editing the text created by Photoshop's horizontal type tool. So there's some jammier looking text. What we can do now is click to add a layer style, and we're going to choose bevel and emboss. If we click here, that will then give us the layer style window up, and we can then modify the shape of our text to make it look more three-dimensional. Okay, for jammier looking text, set the style to inner bevel and give the technique a nice smooth option there to get the nice smooth edges to your jam, and increase the depth to something really large like 725%. And then when you increase the size as well, you'll start to notice that you've got a more jammy looking outline there with some lovely highlights and some shadows as well. And you can always experiment with the direction as well, depending on the type of effect you want, and that changes the lighting dramatically. But let's stick with up for the moment, and let's soften the edge by taking this to around about 11 or so. That should just help get more delicate looking textures to our jam. That should do. And then you can also change the lighting as well. If you drag this around here, you can see it's changing the way that the highlights and shadows are working. So you can change the angle here to around about 146 to give us some jammy specular highlights. They're fairly tight and thin like so. We've got a nice 3D effect going on there, but it's a little bit clean and computer generated. So let's rough things up with a lovely pattern overlay. Now if you click on here, you can see a thumbnail, and you can load in more interesting looking textures by going down to texture fill and just click OK to add the new textures. Then scroll down until you find this one here. If you move over it and show the tooltip, it's Frozen Rain. Click to select that, and that will give us the basis for our jammy texture. So we need to blend that with the original colors that we've created, and the first thing to do is to set the blending mode to something different like linear light, and that brings back some of the lovely reds. We can then change the opacity to something much lower like 16%, so just drag that and take that down and get a hint of the jam showing through. And then you can fine-tune the look of the texture by popping to scale and reducing that down to something like 45% or so, just to make those little grains a lot smaller and more subtle. And when you're finished, you can click OK to apply the layer style and create more realistic looking gem. If I just click to deselect the path, hit Tab to hide the floating windows, Z for the zoom tool, right click, fit on screen, then you can see our jam texture more effectively. And the lovely thing about editing type in Photoshop is you can go back to the layers palette, you can turn these effects off or double click on them to edit them and change them, and you can change the paths as well at any time to fine tune the look of your vector based text.